The recording has begun, so just one more reminder that if you've got your camera on, you might want to switch it off. Otherwise, you'll be featured in our lovely recorded video. So a huge welcome to our top tips for progress review session. Thank you so much for joining us today. We know that you have got so much going on. You are incredibly busy people. You're doing a brilliant job of teaching your own classes and also supporting our student teachers. So we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Today, we're going to be together for 45 minutes and we're going to be doing all things progress reviews. So these are our session aims. We're going to start off with looking at the STEEL descriptors and the thresholds for the key assessment points. Then we're going to move into looking at a synthesis of progress and what that might look like. We're going to talk about the progress review meeting, so the process of holding that meeting, and then again the threshold, what it is that we're looking for in this first progress review. We're going to have an orientation time, so we're going to look at the PLP and have a live demonstration of completing a progress review on the PLP, where it is you're going to put those things. And we're going to end with some top tips and an opportunity for question and answer. If you've got any questions as we run, please pop them in the chat. And we've got four colleagues with us today. You are with me, Sian Wickersham. I'm one of the mentor leads and one of the primary university tutors. Then I've got my colleagues Emma and Kerry, who will be doing bits of facilitation during this session, who are some secondary leads. And then we've also got our colleague Rachel, who is going to be manning the chat for us as well. So to start off with, we've got our important dates. These are found in the clinical practice guide. So you might be that you're familiar with these, but just to draw your attention to that progress review 1. So CAP 1, progress review, and CAP mean the same thing, key assessment point progress review, and that is next week. So the week beginning the 11th of November. And the other thing that hopefully we're all aware of is that this week it is learning and teaching observation 1. We've also got a really useful appendix in the clinical practice guide. So it is appendix 8 on page 83 in the PGCE clinical practice guide. And basically everything that we are covering today, obviously you can go back and watch the recording of this session, but it's also all there in the CP guide. So the different rubrics that we're going to show you and the different thresholds, etc. If ever you're thinking, I can't quite remember what they said in the session, you can go to appendix 8 and all of the key information and key dates is there. So here is a little reminder of the STEEL descriptors, and these are the standards that we are assessing our student teachers against. So for those of you that have been completing your learning and teaching observation this week, you will have been using these descriptors to assess against the standards that are reflected on the learning and teaching observation form. But now, during the progress review, we're going to be looking at all of the teaching standards and assessing them against these STEEL descriptors. So the idea being that when student teachers start with us, they are mostly sitting in that unaware space. And then gradually, as we move through the programme, they'll move to aware, to capable, and then potentially QTS plus. So during this progress review, so our first progress review, you will probably be looking mostly at unaware and aware for most student teachers. So let's have a little look at what those things mean. When we're thinking about a student teacher who is unaware, it means that they are relatively unaware of the important information related to pedagogy and human development. So there are certain gaps in their knowledge that they just don't have an understanding of. And we would see quite a lot of student teachers start off in this unaware space when they join us on the PGCE programme. Not necessarily all student teachers will start here, because we often have student teachers that come with a whole wealth of knowledge and experience. Maybe they've been a teaching assistant, maybe they've got experience working with children, but it is not a bad thing that student teachers start here. It simply means that they haven't yet been exposed to some of this information that makes up the craft of teaching. And as new facts are learnt and new skills are attempted, their understanding starts to increase. And we end up in this place where we've got some awareness. So we would assess student teachers as aware. They are beginning to master concepts, theories, and context-specific information, but they are not yet able to independently and confidently apply this. So you're seeing an element of understanding starting to emerge, but it's not something that they're necessarily able to put into practice by themselves, and there's not an element of consistency there. So ideas and techniques are starting to be put into action, but potentially you're having to scaffold really heavily. So you're having to say, okay, first you're going to do this, then you're going to do this, and then we're going to expect to see this. And the student might be able to follow your scaffolding. So they are showing an awareness of some of the things you're asking them to do. But it might not always turn out as expected as well. So sometimes you might have student teachers that come with ideas and they try those ideas out, but it doesn't turn out exactly as you would expect. So that sort of consistency, that independence, and that confidence is lacking in this area of awareness. So as I said earlier, probably your student teacher is going to be a mixture of unaware and aware at this point. But let's have a little look at capable and QTS Plus as well. So when we move into capable, we've got the student teacher might still need to concentrate a lot in planning or applying for a particular teaching technique or skill, but the student teacher is increasingly comfortable with a growing repertoire of skills. And so it's at this stage that the student teacher would be achieving at a level that is consistent with QTS. So when a student teacher is being assessed as capable in all of the standards, that is when we're saying, yes, they are at a level where we're able to award QTS. So when we get to the end of our programme, that's what we are looking for. And then we might have some student teachers that go beyond this idea of capable. So the QTS Plus descriptors are aligned with the induction descriptors of the PSTL. And this is where you're seeing firmly embedded and consistent practice. So in capable, there will be an increasing level of consistency and a growing repertoire of skills, but there's still some element of things being a little bit inconsistent. Within QTS Plus, we're expecting firmly embedded and consistent practice. And so we've also got this matrix here. So when you are preparing for the progress review, and Emma is going to talk us through what sort of the nuts and bolts of that preparation looks like, these are some of the adjectives that you are going to be thinking of and seeing where you think your student teacher sits in relation to these adjectives. So if they're showing they've got limited understanding of something, or they've not yet considered a particular aspect, or perhaps they use something in an inappropriate way, so they use a technique when it wasn't appropriate for your class, or perhaps some things that they're doing are having a bit of a negative impact on the class, you're probably thinking that they are unaware for those standards that you're thinking of. When you're looking at some standards and you're thinking, yes, they've got a growing understanding of something, they're having an increasingly positive impact in certain areas, they're seeing some success with certain pedagogical approaches that they're taking, they are improving in terms of their knowledge and understanding of certain areas, then you're probably seeing that your student teacher is starting to be in that aware column. It might be that you've got a couple of student teachers that are verging into capable, potentially at this point, but it's likely that most of our student teachers will be sitting there in that unaware and aware column. So when you're starting to think about your assessment using the professional standards, be thinking about what type of feedback you've given the student teachers, what language have you used? If you were to describe their practice in a certain area, what would you say? Would you say that they use things in an insecure way, perhaps? Or maybe there's improving, or maybe they're using techniques suitably. And so thinking about that language can really support you when you're making your judgments, and then also can support you when you go to write up those judgments as well. So here are our key assessment point thresholds. So right now, we are at the midpoint of clinical practice 1. And again, these CAP thresholds can be found in that Appendix 8 in the clinical practice guide. So the threshold that we are looking for is that student teachers are achieving aware against the 10 critical descriptors. So the 10 critical descriptors are those that are highlighted yellow, and they're also flagged on the PLP on the form that Emma is going to show you later. If any of those have not progressed beyond unaware, so if you're looking at one of the critical descriptors and you're thinking, no, this student teacher isn't aware in there, you need to flag this to your senior mentor, and the concern over progress process should be followed. So we're looking for those 10 critical descriptors to be aware. All of the others can be unaware, and that is okay. There's not a concern over progress. So even if they've got 10 aware, which are the 10 critical ones, and everything else is unaware, that's okay. They're still progressing as we would expect. But if a single one of the critical descriptors is still unaware, then you would need to speak to your senior mentor and talk to your university tutor, and the concern over progress process should be followed there. So you can have more than 10, be aware, but you can't have the 10 critical ones, any one of those not progressing. If you are feeling like they are perhaps borderline on a particular standard, it's of course okay to talk to your senior mentor about this and have those conversations as well. So this isn't something that we're expecting you to do, mentors, we're expecting you to do completely solo. It might be that you feel really confident. Senior mentors, if we've got senior mentors in the room, it might be that you want to provide some support to mentors, especially if it's the mentor's first time doing it. So do feel free to reach out for support to your senior mentor and also to your university tutor as well. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Emma now.
Diolch, Sian. Okay, croeso, welcome to everybody. Just to echo some of Sian's opening remarks, it's really good to be with you all, and thank you for devoting your time to this. Okay, so the progress review process, the philosophy behind it is that you are going to do it with your student teacher, not to them. And the sort of underpinning rationale for this is that the student teacher, we hope by the end of this year, will become empowered to take ownership over their own professional development. So before the progress review meeting takes place, before you come to complete the form, the student teacher will do a lot of work themselves to prepare for the progress review. And it's worth sort of taking you through those steps so that you know that they are supposed to be this week getting ready for that progress review, putting in that good work. It's also worth mentioning that they have already had a university session on preparing for progress review. So everything I'm about to share with you now, they should be fully aware of. And furthermore, the senior mentor will also be helping them in their senior mentor meeting this week as they prepare for the progress review next week. So the first part of the process, as I mentioned a moment ago, is that the student teacher self-assesses against all of the 32 elements of the QTS descriptors, and they will do that on the PLP. And once they've done that, you will be able to see how they've judged themselves. They will be using those same descriptors of unaware, aware, capable, QTS plus. But of course, as we know of novices, they can be less proficient early on at self-assessment. They're very much aware of that. So they might find it quite tricky at this early stage, at this first progress review, to make sort of accurate and robust judgments about themselves because they don't necessarily know what they don't know. However, it's still worth getting them used to that self-assessment process and thinking about their practice so that they can come to you for the progress review having done that self-reflection, self-evaluation. Based on their self-evaluation and self-assessment, they will complete a synthesis of progress. I'm going to sort of give you an overview of what that includes in a moment so that you know what the expectation is. But ultimately, it will help them to identify their areas where they've made the most significant progress since the start of placement one, but also to help them to provide some targets, some clear targets that they will be working towards in preparation for progress review 2, which will happen at the end of clinical practice 1. So it really is important that you support them to get those targets for improvement in particular accurate, because that's hopefully going to sort of be a touch point for them over the coming weeks after progress review 1 as they move forward to the end of the placement. So having done all of that preparation, the student teacher will then hand over to you. You will be able to review their self-assessment judgments and their synthesis of progress on the PLP. I'll show you in a moment where you can find that. And we really do would like to impress upon you, how important it is that you have a look at that, particularly at this first progress review stage, not least because they will have done quite a significant amount of preparation work on that. But ultimately, what that will allow you to do is to come into the progress review meeting with your student teacher, able to have a robust conversation about their self-assessment judgments and their progress overall. Now, Of course, we're not expecting you, and neither would it be possible for you to cover all 32 elements of the standards in that progress review meeting. So we recommend that if there are any particular elements where the student teacher has achieved some real success, um, and ought to be celebrated, or if there are areas of their practice that you've been giving them feedback for over the last few weeks that they really are not quite getting there, thinking about how they can address those particular areas will be really a really good way of using the time in that conversation, in that progress review meeting. Likewise, if the student teacher has put down some self-assessment judgments that you think have been a little bit stingy or have been a little bit overly generous, then there's the opportunity to have a dialogue around those judgments, and also looking at the language of unaware and aware and capable, as you saw from Sian's previous slides, and to get them to really think about those adjectives, and to also look back at the feedback that they've had over the last few weeks, in order to sort of orientate themselves more clearly with their self-assessment judgments and with their progressions. They've got a more realistic view of it. So what should happen at the end of that meeting is that you work with them on those targets. Have a look at the targets they've written for themselves. If you think that they've missed anything, if you think that they need to add something that they've missed out, or reword something, then you can ask them to do that, so they're really clear going forward into the next progress review. And then at the end of that process, you will complete the progress review form on the PLP, which should reflect the outcomes that you've discussed in the meeting. So, for example, if the student teacher has marked themselves as unaware for one of the 10 critical elements of standards, but you actually feel, and you discussed in the progress review meeting, that actually, there's evidence to suggest that they are at aware, then the outcomes on the progress review form itself should reflect that. There shouldn't be any nasty shocks when it comes to that form being completed and released by you. So it should reflect that discussion, and it will help the student teacher going forward in addressing those targets and hopefully making progress in preparation for progress review 2. So that's the process in a nutshell. Turning our attention now to the student teacher's synthesis of progress, and I am going to sort of give this a very, very quick overview. Noting that you'll be able to go back and look at the recording if you're unsure, but also this is something that the student teacher will do the bulk of the work on, but it's worth noting the guidance that we give them. So the first thing that we ask them to do is to identify 1 to 2 critical elements of pedagogy. So that's P1, managing the learning environment, assessment, P3, the 4 purposes, and blended teaching, which is P9. So from those, they're going to select 1 to 2 where they feel the most progress has been made since they started with you for clinical practice 1. And they're also going to identify the relevant critical elements of collaboration, professional learning, innovation, and leadership that helped them to improve those critical elements of pedagogy. So if they've made gains in managing the learning environment, perhaps that's as a result of them using the research and inquiry time to do some focused observation. Perhaps the team teaching that they've done in collaboration with you as a mentor has really helped them to improve their management of the learning environment. Perhaps the time that they've taken to really get to know the learners and build those relationships has helped them to move their pedagogy forward in that regard. So they're thinking about these standards in an interconnected way in this synthesis of progress. They're going to use the prompt that you'll see in a moment when I show you the template for the synthesis of progress to critically reflect on their practice. They'll be asking themselves, what progress have I made in the selected elements of pedagogy? How do I know that I've made that progress? What evidence is there to suggest that? Is it that my evaluations of lessons are helping me to reach that judgment? Is it that the feedback that I've had from my mentor is also helping me to make that judgment? Is it the outcomes that I can see from my learners, the impact that I'm having in the classroom? What is it that's helping me make that judgment? And then also, how did those elements of collaboration, professional learning, innovation, and/or leadership influence that progress in pedagogy? Once they've decided all of those things, they will turn to writing up their synthesis of progress. The aim is to prompt the student teachers to think more critically about their progress. They're not simply just saying what went well and even better if, they're thinking more carefully, more purposefully about the elements of the standards, where they've made progress and why. They can hyperlink throughout the synthesis of progress when they're writing it up to assets or evidence that enhance their reflection. For example, they might make a link to a particular lesson plan where they've planned for something particular. Perhaps it's an assessment strategy that they've used on more than one occasion that's worked particularly well. However, and I can't stress this heavily enough, it's not essential that they link to evidence. We've moved away from a portfolio of evidence now. This is much more reflective. However, they can hyperlink if they feel that they'd like to back up what they've said in that synthesis of progress. So they could use examples of pupil work, links to lesson evaluations, research and inquiry log entries, etc. We've given them a guided word count. All of this is on the PLP for them. They know all of these details. And as I said a moment ago, they are required to reflect on just the critical elements of the standards in this first synthesis of progress. As they move forward to CAP 2, they can range a little bit more widely to the other elements of the standards within the professional standards for teaching and leadership. After each synthesis of progress is complete, the student logs those elements that they have covered so that they can sort of keep a track of which elements they talked about through each of the 4 progress review synthesis of progresses they've written. And they must aim to cover a range of them by the end of the PGCE year. They don't need to cover them all. So that's just a very brief overview of all of the prep work that they will do before they come to you. When it comes to the progress review meeting itself, just to reiterate some of the things that I've said before I show you the form live on the PLP. Obviously, before the meeting, the student teacher will have done all of that good preparation work. All of the elements of the PSTL are assessed in the progress review itself, but you don't need to talk about all of them in that meeting. It's really important that you make time for that meeting to happen face to face if you can before you write the form, because it's an opportunity to have that professional learning conversation with the student teacher so they understand why what's helped you arrive at the judgments that you have, and to also help them understand if their self-assessment judgments were a little bit off. And it's important that you look at and centre your professional dialogue in the progress review meeting around the student's self-assessment. So you're acknowledging the good work that they've done in preparation. So thank you in advance for doing this. We know that this is a lot of work on their part, but also a lot of work on yours. So I'm going to stop sharing these slides now, and I'm going to instead share my screen. And hopefully you're able to see that. I've got a thumbs up from my colleague, which says that you can. And just so that you can focus on that completely, I'm just going to switch off my camera there. Okay, so I've got 2 tabs open at the moment. One is in student teacher mode. So the workbook that you're looking at the moment is the sort of student teacher view of the PLP. And I'll flip to a different tab in a moment so that you can see what you can see as a mentor. Now, as you can see, in the assessment tab, I've gone to the synthesis of progress. And everything that I've just described to you that the student teacher needs to do, such as track the elements of the standards they've talked about in the synthesis of progress, such as identify the strengths, the 2 elements of pedagogy, the critical elements where they've made the most progress, they pop them in that column. The elements of the collaboration, professional learning, etc., that help them to make that progress, they can complete in this table. And then they've got space to put their areas for development in terms of their targets, and also how they're going to use the other elements of the standards to help them address those targets. They've also got to comment on how effectively they've developed the cross-curricular skills of their pupils and anything that they've done to address their own competence in those areas too. So they will have done all of that before you meet with them. They will also go to Progress Review 1, and they will go to the student progress review part of the PLP. Here's one I made earlier. And you can see that this student teacher has already started judging themselves as aware, unaware, etc. in all elements of the standards. So you can see they've got the ability to select on the rubric. And once they've saved that, it will be visible from your perspective. So bear with me a second. There we go. let's go to your view. Okay, so now here I am in the Mentor View version of the PLP, and I'm going to progress reviews. I'm going to progress review 1, and you can see that you've got your own sub menu there for Mentor Progress Review. What you've also got in here, if I just take a step back, is a quick access to some guidance, so you can quickly access the professional standards. You'll see there that you can see the critical elements in yellow, so it might be useful to look back to if you're unsure. And you've also got a nice quick access to the STEEL descriptors, the language of the STEEL descriptors too. So hopefully you'll find that useful. So once again, back to the progress review form itself. You can see at the top, you've got place to add in the name of your student. Now, before I get into this form, I'm going to stress a point that I made, and apologies in advance if you attended Top Tips for Learning and Teaching observations. I stressed this point quite heavily in this part of the presentation. At the top left part of this form, you'll see you've got a little blue drop-down menu entitled Assessor Field Actions, and you've got two options: to save and release or to save and hold. If you are in the middle of completing the progress review form and you do not wish for the student to see it half done, then you're going to select save and hold. Once you are ready to share it with the student teacher and you're happy for them to see everything that you've written because the form is complete, you're going to use save and release. Now, you will notice that built into the form are lots of these drop-down menus, which will give you the option to save and hold or save and release. The problem with those is that if you miss one and you haven't just used the catch-all save and hold or save and release in the top left, is that they may be invisible to the student teacher if you haven't released them. So my top tip is to use that top one, save and hold or save and release, when you're ready to share it with the students. So what you've got then are a series of rubrics that takes you all the way through the standards, where you are able to make your judgments. As Sian said, at this stage, it's probably going to be a mixture of aware and unaware, and that's absolutely fine. You can see for this bank, we've got little asterisks that indicate the critical elements of the standards. So at the moment, this hypothetical student teacher is at aware for P1 and aware for P3, which means that they're meeting the threshold. So I'm also going to tick here that those two critical elements have been met at the threshold, at the expected threshold. It's really important that you do it. It's sort of a belt and braces approach to us making sure that the student teacher is on track, is meeting the threshold, and to intervene if there are any concerns. So after each bank of elements of the standards for you to award your judgments on the rubric, you'll also get a box where you can identify areas of strength and a box for identifying priorities for future development. I'm not going to stress over the content or dwell on the content there, because Sian is going to talk you through that content in a moment when we return to the slides. So you'll go through exactly the same process then with the next bank of standards, and note that this time the student is actually unaware for two of the critical elements of the standards. So I'm not going to click the box to say that they have met P6 and P9 at the correct threshold. And for this hypothetical student teacher, that would mean that I would need to flag this up to the senior mentor, excuse me, senior mentor, and initiate the concern of a progress process. So again, I've got areas of strength, priorities for future development pertaining to that bank of standards. Likewise, the rest of the pedagogy standards. This is going to take a bit of time to do this form, but rest assured that you're only going to have to do this twice for clinical practice 1, and it is a holistic overview of everything that the student has done with you since the start of the placement. Then we've got the collaboration standards, same process, click if they have met the threshold. More areas for you to give qualitative comments, and so on and so forth. And I think you probably get the gist of this now. So it'll take us all the way through to the leadership standards. And the last thing that I'll say in this part of the demo is that you've got a couple of extra bits at the bottom of this form, which are, first of all, to indicate the extent to which your student teacher's personal literacy, numeracy, and digital competence skills are at a sufficient level. And you've got 3 options here: good levels of competence, minor issues to address, and requires improvement. And obviously what that will give us the opportunity to do is to see that from a university perspective, but also for you to have logged it there so that the student teacher can access access some extra support or work on this in the time leading up to the next progress review. So you're going to give outcomes for all of those areas. You've got a place to log the number of absences that the student teacher has had from clinical practice, and that's just the days that they've missed from school, which will all be logged in their attendance area of the PLP. They should be keeping that record. And then if the student teacher has not met the threshold, or if you've got concerns about the student teacher's ability to uphold the code of conduct, you're either going to say that no, they're not upholding it, or yes, they are. If they're not, again, concern of a progress will need to be initiated. And if they've not met the threshold for progress review 1, then you're also going to indicate that there is concern of a progress. Once you're happy with all of that, you're going to save and release it, and the student teacher will be able to view it from their perspective. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to go back to the slides. And hopefully Sian will be able to take over from there. I think it's Sian up next.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes.
Wonderful. Just bear with me whilst I get those slides back up for you, Sian. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Emma. So we are now going to have a little look at an exemplar of what some of those boxes where you've got to type things might look like. So this is an exemplar taken from a PGC primary student teacher, and this example is actually from Clinical Practice 2. So we're looking at a slightly different threshold here, but the things that you've got to do remain the same. So number 1, the outcomes have been indicated for all elements of the standards. So we've got P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, and every single one of them has been assessed. So you might remember that in our learning and teaching observation, there's a not applicable box. For this one, we are assessing all elements of the standards. And then the second thing is, as Emma mentioned, if the critical standards have been met at the correct threshold, you need to tick the boxes to indicate that. So this is just a way of us catching any student teachers that aren't meeting those critical standards. It will flag up if one of those isn't ticked. But for you guys, you need to make sure that you tick those. Otherwise, you'll probably be getting an email saying your student teacher hasn't met a critical standard and you're thinking, oh, they have actually. So make sure you tick those different boxes. So, and then here is an exemplar from the areas of strength. So this example is taken from the pedagogy section, so refining teaching. So I'll give you a minute just to read through, and then I'll draw out some of these key points here. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to read through and you can notice, I think it's 4 or 5 sentences here. So we're not expecting you to write a whole essay for each of these sections. So a few sentences. And the first thing is make sure that it's constructive and it includes this advice for improvement. So it kind of names some of the things that the student teachers are able to do, but also makes some suggestions or says some of the things that actually they need to do next. The second thing is the feedback is cross-referenced to the elements of the standards. So you can see here it's cross-referenced to P1. So they've taken the time to know the children's name and personalities and use this as information to encourage positive learning behaviours, and they've explicitly referenced P1. So when you're referring to a particular standard, putting the standard in brackets is really helpful. Remember, as Emma said, and this example shows, you don't need to reference all of the standards. I think sometimes mentors feel like they need to do P1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, you can just draw out the key areas of strength, but when you're referencing a standard, put it in brackets there. And then the third and final point is the feedback reflects the language of the STEEL descriptors. So you can see here, we've got some green, you don't need to colour code it, we've colour coded it for you for reference. The green words are language taken from the capable elements of the STEEL descriptors. And then we've got with support, that orange word, which indicates that language comes from the aware section. So when you are writing this feedback, use some of those adjectives in your feedback so that it is crystal clear to both you and the student teacher where that judgment has come from. And then we follow the same 3 principles for the priorities for future development. So I'll give you a minute to read through this section. So again, in here, we've got more of that constructive feedback. So these are the priorities. These are the things that the student is going to do next. They're going to take more time to scrutinise the data. They're going to think more carefully about relevant interventions. They're going to engage in a focused lesson observation. So when you are having those conversations during the progress review or the feedback that you're giving them week on week, you can include some of these next steps here. Again, these next steps are referenced to the standards. So the student teacher can see, okay, if I take my time to plan more relevant interventions for a greater range of children in this class, I'm going to be hitting P2. If I gain experience working with parents and carers, that's going to support me with P4 and P5. And then that third point, again, keep reflecting the language of the skill descriptors and triangulating those with the student outcomes. So if a student teacher is working mainly in aware in a particular standard, use the language from the aware column. Sometimes things can be a bit confused if mentors start using language from the capable column when they're assessing the student teacher as aware. So be a little bit careful of that. Look at that language, maybe have it in front of you when you're writing this feedback. And again, I think this one's 4 or 5 sentences long. You don't need to write essays and essays and essays. It can be notes on the different steps that the student teacher needs to take in order to make progress in this particular area. So we've got another 10 minutes left. We might finish slightly before 1:15, and we're going to finish with some top tips and some resources for you to have a look at. The first top tip is to personalise your feedback to the things that are important for your student teacher's development. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to this feedback. You are going to be focusing on your student teacher's particular area of strength and your student teacher's particular areas for development. So it might be that you spend a lot of time talking about P7 and P8 with one student teacher because those are particular strengths, and with another student teacher, you don't necessarily talk about those that much. You have to do your assessment, but your feedback focuses on different strengths that they've got or different areas for development. You need to grade every standard. So you need to tick the box that says unaware, aware, capable, QTS plus, but you don't need to comment on every standard. So keep those 2 things in mind. What are the particular areas of strength? What are the particular areas for development? And those are the things that are probably going to form the majority of your writing in those boxes. I feel like I've hammered this point a little bit here. If you're stating aware, use the language like developing with support, inconsistent, etc. So use the appropriate descriptors when referring to the specific standard. Otherwise, the student teachers do get really confused. And I think I find when I'm writing it, I find that bank of adjectives really, really helpful, actually, to help me kind of frame some of the things that I'm thinking of. Be mindful of the progress review thresholds. So Appendix 8 of the Clinical Practice Guide. As I said earlier, CAP 1 is aware in the 10 critical standards. Sometimes you might think, okay, I'm confident that my student teacher is aware in 9 of these 10 critical standards. And then one of them, I'm a little bit borderline on it. I think like some days I think, yep, they're probably aware. Other days I think actually maybe they're unaware. It's worth talking that through with someone, because if you're on the borderline and you decide, actually, I think they're unaware, you're initiating concern over progress then. And sometimes you might think, actually, I'm not really concerned about their progress because all they need to do is implement that little bit of feedback that I gave them today, and then they would be aware. So sometimes you might want to have, you just need to bear those in mind when you're doing it. Obviously, if they're unaware, that's absolutely fine. Let's put them as unaware and let's start concern over progress. But sometimes I think mentors occasionally can sort of accidentally start concern over progress because they've erred on the side of caution, and maybe put unaware when they were kind of on the borderline of aware. And actually, when the senior mentor gets in touch to say, oh, your student teacher has got a concern over progress, they say, oh no, I'm not concerned really. So bear that in mind, that if they don't meet one of them, the 10 critical descriptors, that does trigger concern over progress. So if you want to do that, of course, please let us know that you've got a concern. But if you're actually not concerned, it might be worth talking that through with someone. Number 5, this is a conversation that you're having during this progress review. So it's not, let's look at yours and now let's look at mine. You need to discuss why the student teacher has graded themselves in that way. And if you've got discrepancies between your assessments, and as Emma mentioned earlier, at this point, this is the first time that they've done it. So it might well be that you've got some that are a little bit far out. So maybe they've been really negative, maybe they've been really optimistic. Have that conversation and have that discussion. And we've got a video that might help you with that. If that's something that you're feeling a bit nervous about, I'm going to share that on the next slide. So on occasion, the student teacher might share something that affects your decision. So sometimes you might think, oh, I think they're unaware in this particular thing. And then they might share something with you during the meeting and you think, oh, actually, that shows that there's an awareness. So it might be that you do want to change your grading as a result of what the student teacher says, but ultimately your decision is final. So it might be that you do have a conversation and you think, oh, I didn't know that they'd done that reflection on this area of P2. And that means that actually I agree that they're aware now because I hadn't noticed it on their PLP. But if they share some things and they say, no, I think I'm aware, but you still think that they're unaware, that's okay. It is your decision. And you can encourage them to adjust their targets on the synthesis of progress in light of your grading if necessary. So if you have a student teacher that has been well off, so they've graded themselves as capable in every area and you've put them as mostly unaware and aware, they can go back and adjust the targets that they've set themselves in light of your grading. That doesn't happen very often, but just be aware that that's an option. Sometimes this progress review is going to be a really straightforward conversation where you might agree. Oh, I think you've been a bit harsh on yourself there. Actually, I would put you as a level up. Oh, lovely. Thank you, mentor. Agree. Sometimes this is going to be a bit of a tricky conversation. And that's why it is really worth going in and checking the student teacher's self-assessment before you go and have the conversation, because it might be that the student teacher has absolutely nailed it. This is going to be a really easy conversation where you can really focus on your feedback to them and their next steps. Or it could be that actually this is going to be a bit of a trickier conversation. Maybe you're going to have to talk about why this student teacher has been quite so negative about their development. Maybe you're going to have to say, actually, I don't think that you are capable in this standard. So if you go in and you have a look, most of the time, it's often a really straightforward conversation, but go in and have a look so that you are prepared just in case you've got that slightly more tricky situation where you've got a big disagreement there. We've got some other useful resources here. So on our Cardiff Partnership Mentors YouTube channel, here we've got 2 minutes about the CAP thresholds, 2 minutes about progress reviews, 2 minutes about unaware, aware, capable in QTS Plus. So you can go, and these are in English and Welsh, so you can go and have a look at these. And again, it might be worth going and looking at the 2 minutes about unaware and 2 minutes about aware, because that's probably where most of us are going to be sitting. And then we've also got these 3 videos. So the picture on the left of the screen here, you've got a 4-minute video about the progress review self-assessment, and then a 7.5-minute video about the synthesis of progress. And those talk through the different processes again. And then the 20-minute video on the end there is an example of a progress review between a student and a mentor. So if this is the first time that you've done a progress review, or if you think, you know what, I'd like to improve how I do my progress reviews, I'm going to go and have a watch of that. This 20-minute video is a staged video between Tom and Emma where they are having a progress review meeting. So if you're thinking about how I'm going to prepare for this, that would be a really good way to go and have a watch of that so that you can see exactly what it is, the steps that you are going to be taking in that meeting. We've got more useful resources here as well, coming from our shared understanding of the standards. So if you're coming up against a particular standard and you're thinking, I'm not really sure what unaware looks like in differentiation, for example, this shared understanding page breaks down some of the standards and talks in more detail about what that looks like at different levels. And we finished 1 minute early. I'm going to take that. So a huge thank you to everyone who has joined us today. As I say, we don't take your time for granted. We hope this has been useful. A massive diolch yn fawr. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat. I've seen the chat popping, but I've not been looking at it yet. Or you can stay on the line and ask us any questions that you've got now. But a huge thank you and really, really good luck with doing your progress reviews next week. Diolch yn fawr pawb.